So, for earnings per share, the standard that covers this particular concept or this particular topic is IAS 33. For Philippine standards or Philippine version, we have PAS 33. Okay? So, the main objective of this standard, the main objective of this standard is basically to prescribe principles for an entity to determine how the earnings per share will be computed, okay, the amounts, okay, to be provided in order to improve performance comparisons between different entities in the same reporting period and between different reporting periods for the same entity. So kumbaga parang intercomparability and intracomparability. So the reason behind is yun nga, 'di ba, if you go to MAS or managerial accounting, 'di ba meron yung tinatawag na common size financial statement para mas maging comparable yung report ng isang smaller firm against another bigger firm in a scale na parehas yung, kumbaga, walang bias between the relative size of the company. So ganun din dito, para hindi tayo maging bias doon sa pag-analyze na or pag-evaluate ng isang company na not because mas malaki yung earnings niya mas maganda na yung business, we're also going to convert it into a per share basis analysis. Okay, kasi pag naka per share yan, ibig sabihin yun talaga yung earnings ng bawat isang may hawak ng share, di ba? Parang ganun yung labas niya. So that will determine the earnings capacity of the company per share na hawak ng isang shareholder. So the scope of IAS 33, by the way muna, before we move on, if you look into the syllabus and TOS ng board examination, yung IAS 33 earnings per share is actually embedded lang dun sa other topic section, which is actually, expect ulit natin siguro baka mga isa or dalawang tanong lang yan. Baka tag-isa for earnings per share and book value per share. Okay, so yan. So aralin natin lahat ng concepts, pero pagdating sa actual board examination, expect na you'll only have around one or siguro at best two. Okay? Minimum baka isang question. Okay? Tapos kung hindi pa nakuha doon sa test bank na ginawa, baka wala pang item. Okay? So anyway, mas maganda nang aralin kaysa lumabas tapos hindi pala natin alam yung concepts. Okay. So for the scope of IAS 33, okay, this will apply to entities whose securities are publicly traded or that are in the process of issuing securities to the public. Okay? Other entities that choose to present earnings per share information must also comply with IAS 33. Okay, so ang required lang, okay, for purposes of IAS 33, ang required lang is yung mga entities who are publicly traded or who plans to have their shares traded publicly. Okay, in other words, yung mga gustong i-trade sa stock market yung kanilang shares or yung mga existing na nandun. Okay? Tapos, kung hindi ka naman traded pero gusto mo pa ring i-provide yung earnings per share, gawin mo lang. Okay? So, other entities that choose to present earnings per share information must also comply with IAS 33. Kung gusto mo, basta sundan mo yung requirement. Okay? If both parent and consolidated statements are presented in a single report, earnings per share is required only for the consolidated statements. So, as per the requirement. Okay? Pero kung for full disclosure, kahit yung mga subsidiary, kahit dun sa mga individual reports, pwede mo pa rin i-present naman yan. Pero ang sinasabi lang dito, for a consolidated report, okay, ang kailangan lang natin yung earnings per share doon sa consolidated FS natin. Okay. So we go to the key definitions. So first item doon, ordinary share. Siyempre, madali lang naman yan. So ordinary share, also known as common share or common stock, depende kung anong version ng libro ang binabasa mo or whatever standard setting bodies yung binabasa mong standard. Okay, so this pertains to an equity instrument that is subordinate to all other classes of equity instruments. Kasi ordinary nga siya, di ba? So malamang kung may ordinary, may preference, di ba? So yung preference shares kasi, di ba yun yung may preference as to dividends and preference as to assets, and they have various classifications and characteristics such as cumulative, participating, cumulative and participating, or whatever. Okay, so yun siya. Meron pang convertible, callable, etc. So, yung mga yon, those are the preference shares. Ordinary shares, sila yung kumbaga, pinakahuli sa priority pagdating ng liquidation just in case. Okay, so potential ordinary share naman, this pertains to those that are not yet ordinary shares, okay, pero possible na maging ordinary share eventually. Okay, by the way, bakit tayo nag-focus sa ordinary share? Kasi ang preference share may sariling dividends yan. Okay? So may sariling earnings na allocated sa kanya. So ang pag earnings per share ang pinag-uusapan, ang focus lang natin is yung earnings per ordinary share talaga. Okay? So in the case of potential ordinary shares, these are relevant in your computation because when you talk about earnings per share, there is what we call basic and diluted earnings per share. So kapag diluted earnings per share ang kino-compute mo, you need to determine all potential ordinary shares because they will, parang ang labas, after mong makompute yung basic earnings per share, you're also going to disclose to the shareholders or to the readers of the report na if in case this potentially dilutive or this potential ordinary shares will be converted or mangyari nga na talagang maging shares na siya, ito yung magiging effect doon sa earnings per share. Parang ganun. Kasi parang kung madadagdagan yung shares, edi madadilute or mas bababa yung share ng bawat shareholder, okay, based on the number of shares that they have. Okay, so anyway, these are the usual items that you will see doon sa ating potentially dilutive or potential ordinary shares. So we have convertible debt kapag yung utang ay magiging shares. Convertible preferred shares na pwede maging ordinary share. Share warrants, share options, and share rights which are going to entitle the holders for additional shares in case they will exercise these particular items. Employee stock purchase plans which is generally pwede siyang i-relate doon sa share options. Pero kapag employee stock purchase plans kasi parang hindi siya optional. Ang mangyayari is parang in-establish talaga yan for the purpose na kapag nag-vest yung plan or kapag natapos yung plan, bibigyan mo talaga ng shares yung mga employees. So hindi yan at the option of the employees but rather it is an outright issuance of shares upon the vesting of the or upon the completion of the requirements dun ng plan natin. Okay? Contractual rights to purchase shares which is almost similar to share warrants and share options pero to separate it lang baka kasi may pinasukan kang ibang transaction that will result to the holder of that contractual right to purchase additional shares. And contingent issuance contracts or agreements, okay, such as those arising in business combination, yan yung pagdating mo ng AFAR, yan yung mga tinatawag natin na contingent considerations, okay, wherein may additional shares na i-issue kapag na-satisfy yung certain conditions or certain requirements. Okay, so yan yung potential ordinary shares natin. Okay? Punta naman tayo sa dilution and anti-dilution. Pag sinabi nating dilution, it is either the reduction in earnings per share or the increase in loss per share. Okay, so take note magkabaliktad yun. Kasi baka isipin mo later on or pag nagko-compute ka later on, lalo na kapag loss yung na-compute mo, baka isipin mo anti-dilutive siya, dilutive pala. Okay? So when you talk about dilution, always remember, dilution is either the reduction in the earnings per share or the increase in loss per share resulting from the assumptions that convertible instruments are converted, that options are exercised, and other contracts or transactions will be consummated, okay, to a point na masasatisfy lahat ng conditions and therefore magkakaroon ng additional denominator doon sa computation natin later on. Okay? So kapag anti-dilution naman ang pinag-uusapan natin, baliktad naman. Tataas ang earnings per share or bababa ang loss per share. Okay? So yun yung concept naman yan. So same din lang kapag nagkaroon ng transaction or kapag na-satisfy lahat ng mga assumptions natin na magkakaroon ng conversion, magkakaroon ng additional shares, tas ang result niya is either tataas yung earnings or bababa yung loss per share, anti-dilution naman yun. Okay? So why is it important that you understand dilution and anti-dilution? Kasi for purposes of computation ng diluted earnings per share later on, diluted or potentially dilutive items lang ang dapat nating isama sa computation. Okay? Again, potentially dilutive shares lang dapat or potentially dilutive items lang ang isasama natin sa computation. Okay? Kapag gumawa ka ng computation at naging anti-dilutive siya, hindi siya dapat sinasama. Isa-scrap mo siya later on. Anyway, meron tayong guide later as to how you can determine if the items are dilutive or not. Okay. So, dun tayo sa requirements to present EPS. Okay. So, an entity whose securities are publicly traded or that is in the process of issuance or issuing the shares in the public must present on the face of the statement of comprehensive income basic and diluted earnings per share for profit or loss from continuing operations attributable to the ordinary equity holders of the parent entity and profit or loss attributable to the ordinary equity holders of the parent entity for the period for each class of ordinary shares that has a different right to share in profit for the period. Okay, medyo weird lang itong second portion na to. 'Di ba kasi parang 'di ba ang labas wala naman tayong masyadong nabasa na wala pa naman siguro kayong nabasa na situation wherein ordinary shares have different rights to share profits. Parang ordinary share 1, ordinary share 2, ganun. Or ordinary share type A, ordinary share type B, parang ganun. Wala ka pa namang nabasang ganun, no? Pero, ang concept lang is, if in case, okay? If in case, there is a situation na may mabasa kang ganun, na may mga different classes of ordinary share, then, we present the earnings per share for each class of ordinary share that there is. Pero, as far as I can remember, even in the board examination, isang type lang naman talaga ng ordinary share ang pinipresent. Therefore, isang computation lang ng earnings per share ang lumalabas. Okay. So, yun. So, basta tatandaan, kailangan i-present yan sa continuing operations lang. Okay? Continuing operation. Okay. Next. If an entity presents the components of profit or loss in a separate income statement, it presents earnings per share only in that separate statement. Okay, so kumbaga parang ang labas niyan, separate yung income, separate yung profit or loss, separate yung other comprehensive income. Diba? So parang ganun siya. So ang ibig sabihin nun, kung nakaseparate yung profit or loss, doon sa profit or loss ka lang magpe-present ng earnings per share. Hindi mo na siya ipe-present doon sa comprehensive income. Okay? Next, basic and diluted earnings per share must be presented with equal prominence for all periods presented. Ibig sabihin lang, hindi pwedeng kitang-kita yung earnings per share na basic tapos nakatago yung diluted earnings per share kasi pangit yung labas. Parang ganun yung concept niya. Ibig sabihin, kung paano mo pinresent or kung paano naka-present yung basic earnings per share, dapat in a similar fashion, ganun din naka-present yung diluted earnings per share. Kaya usually, kung titignan mo dun sa mga pine-present ng mga listed companies or yung mga publicly traded companies, ang ginagawa dyan, after i-present ang basic earnings per share, automatically sa baba niya nakalagay agad yung diluted earnings per share. Para equal yung prominence or equal yung way ng presentation, equal yung or consistent yung presentation ng mga items. Okay? Basic and diluted earnings per share must be presented even if the amounts are negative. Okay? Ayan. So, syempre, kung loss per share ang labas niya, edi ganun, i-present mo pa rin. Okay? Yan. Next, if an entity reports a discontinued operation, okay, basic and diluted amounts per share must be disclosed for the discontinued operation either on the face of the comprehensive income or separate income statement if presented or in the notes to the financial statements. Okay? So if an entity reports a discontinued operation, basic and diluted amounts per share must be disclosed for the discontinued operation. Pero this time, either in the face or in the notes. Kasi yung pine-present natin na nasa face of the FS, yun yung galing sa continuing operation. In other words, pag nandun na tayo sa financial statements later on kasi, yung income statement natin, it can be income from continuing operation tapos yung single line item na income from discontinued operation. So, ang pine-present lang nating earnings per share is yung continuing. Bakit? Kasi, ang concept niyan, kung yung discontinued operation hindi na nga siya matutuloy next year, then it will not be relevant anymore in the succeeding period. So, hindi na siya magiging comparable doon sa, or hindi na siya magiging relevant doon sa next year's FS. Kaya ang pinagbabangga mo lang yung continuing operations na EPS or earnings per share at saka yung next year, continuing din lang. Kaya yung discontinued, pwede mo siyang i-present sa face pero kailangan mong i-specify na itong EPS na na-compute na to is para lang doon sa discontinued portion. Okay? Or better yet, para hindi nakakalito, mas maganda i-present mo na lang yan sa notes. Okay? Which is, ako personally, mas gusto ko sa notes na lang para hindi nakakalito yung EPS or yung earnings per share na pine-present doon sa ibabaw or doon sa baba nung profit or loss. Kasi usually ang presentation yan, after mong i-present yung profit or loss sa baba, ilalagay mo na agad yung basic earnings per share at saka diluted earnings per share. Yan. So, in the case of accountants, kung kunyari accountant ka or CPA ka, at least may intindihan mo bakit dalawa yung nakikita mong earnings per share. Bakit may earnings per share sa base sa continuing tapos may earnings per share din sa discontinued. Pero for some na walang idea kung bakit dalawa, edi mas nakakalito pa, 'di ba? So mas maganda yung discontinued operations na EPS sa notes mo na lang ilagay para minsanan pati yung explanation nandun na. Okay, so yan. What else? O doon na tayo sa basic earnings per share. Okay, so basic earnings per share is calculated by dividing profit or loss attributable to ordinary equity holders of the parent entity. Ito yung tinatawag na numerator. Yan yung net income attributable to ordinary shares or NIAT-OS. Okay? Net income attributable to ordinary shares. Okay? NIAT-OS. Okay? Yun yung numerator by the weighted average number of ordinary shares outstanding. Okay? Also known as the denominator. Okay. So, yung earnings numerator natin, which is the profit or loss from continuing operation, okay, used for the calculation should be after deducting all expenses including taxes, minority interest, and preference dividends. Okay? So, di ba kasi nga, ang tinutukoy natin na numerator is yung attributable lang sa ordinary share. In other words, dapat nakatanggal na yung mga ibabawas for taxes, ibabawas na galing sa or na ibibigay sa non-controlling interest, yung ibabawas na para doon sa dividends ng preference shares, okay? And by the way, when you talk about preference shares, 'di ba dapat yung yung preference shares natin kung yan ay cumulative, whether may declaration ng dividend or wala, dapat ibabawas mo lagi. Tapos in the case naman na yan ay non-cumulative, ibabawas mo lang yung preference dividends kapag may declaration. Okay, so ulitin natin ha. In the case of preference dividends, okay, automatic binabawas mo yung dividend, okay, for cumulative preference shares whether there is declaration or none. Okay? Para makuha mo yung NIAT-OS or yung numerator. Pero in the case that the preference shares is non-cumulative, in other words, kung walang dineclare, walang dividend na ibibigay, then you are only going to deduct the preference dividends from the net income kung may declaration. Okay, so yun yan. Tapos, yung denominator, basic lang naman yan. The denominator, which is the number of ordinary shares, is calculated by adjusting the shares in issue at the beginning of the period by the number of shares bought back or issued during the period multiplied by the time-weighted factor. Okay. So, pag sinabi nating time-weighted factor, yan yung mga, parang example, unfair naman kasi kung may parehas na earnings na hati. Okay? Yung existing shareholder since January at saka yung shareholder na December lang pumasok, di ba? So parang ang labas, bakit yung hati ng earnings ay magkaparehas, di ba? Dapat mas malaki yung portion nung outstanding shareholder since the beginning of the period kaysa doon sa mga pumasok lang in between or during the period, di ba? So yun siya. So in this case, pag sinabi nating weighing factor, okay? Yan yung mga 12/12, 6/12, depende kung kailan sila pumasok during the period. So kung pumasok sila ng July 1, edi July, August, September, October, November, December, 6/12. Parang ganun lang. Pero take note, in the determination of the time weighing factor, always remember yung basic rule natin na kapag yan ay stock dividends or share splits, okay, they are treated retrospectively. So, ibig sabihin, they are treated as if nangyari sila at the beginning of the period. So, walang time weighing factor. So, ibig sabihin, kung kunyari, nag-declare ng 10% stock dividend, kahit nangyari pa yan ng December, automatic, yung 10% na na-compute mo, treated siya as if existing siya since the start of the year. Tapos kung nagkaroon ng share split, ganun din. Okay? Tapos, contingently issuable shares are included in the basic earnings per share denominator when the contingency has been met. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, yung actual na contingent or contingently issuable shares that were actually issued, okay, yun ay kasama na. Okay? Sa basic. Pero kapag they are contingently issuable shares that are not yet issued or that are not yet actually issued by the company, they are not yet part of basic earnings per share. Pero kasama sila sa the computation ng diluted earnings per share kasi potentially dilutive item sila. Okay? Kung na-satisfy yung criteria of dilution. Okay, so yun. Walang masyadong issue sa basic earnings per share kasi ang ginagawa lang naman dyan, basta dapat masiguro mong tama yung numerator mo, tapos sa denominator, ang issue lang doon, masiguro mo na tama yung time weighing factor na ginamit mo at tama yung treatment mo doon sa mga retrospective application dapat. Okay? Doon naman tayo sa diluted EPS. So, sa diluted earnings per share naman, ang gagawin mo, ang adjustment sa numerator will be after mong makuha yung net income attributable to ordinary shares, you're going to either add back the taxes or add back the preference share dividends if these items or yung mga potentially dilutive items mo, kapag na-convert sila, hindi ka na mag-i-incur ng tax or dividends or preference dividends. Parang ganun siya. Tapos sa denominator, yung ganun din lang, idagdag mo yung additional shares na makukuha mo kapag nagkaroon ng conversion or kapag nagkaroon ng satisfaction or na-satisfy natin yung kapag na-satisfy yung conditions for the potentially dilutive items. Okay? So ito yung sinasabi natin na guidance. Okay, para alam natin kung paano ka magko-compute ng diluted earnings per share. So sa convertible securities muna tayo. Okay. So the numerator should be adjusted for the after-tax effects of dividends and interest charge in relation to dilutive potential ordinary shares and for any other changes in income that would result from the conversion of the potential ordinary shares. The denominator should include shares that would be issued on the conversion. So simple lang, di ba? Ang gagawin mo sa numerator, ibalik mo yung mga nailagay mo na doon sa income statement okay, na items or na ibawas mo doon sa net income na in relation doon sa mga securities or doon sa mga items na mako-convert if in case there will be conversion. Okay? Ang usual na laman niyan is either kapag convertible bonds yan, yung tax ibabalik mo. Kapag convertible preference shares yan, ang gagawin mo, hindi mo na ibabawas yung preference dividends. Tapos sa denominator, simple lang, kung magkano yung shares na madadagdag, idagdag mo dun sa denominator. Okay? Medyo mas complicated ang warrants, yung warrants and options, kasi before mo pang i-compute yung potential amount ng increase ng shares mo, ang kailangan mo munang alamin is whether it is really dilutive or not. Okay? So, in calculating diluted EPS, assume the exercise of outstanding dilutive options and warrants. The assumed proceeds from exercise would be regarded as having been used to repurchase ordinary shares at the average market price during the period. Ang tawag dyan ay Treasury share approach. Okay? Yung nabasa mo yan, Treasury share approach yan. The difference between the number of ordinary shares assumed, okay, issued on exercise, and the number of ordinary shares assumed repurchase shall be treated as an issue of ordinary shares for no consideration. In other words, yun yung madadagdag lang sa denominator. Yan, syempre, ang issue mo dyan, pag English, no, parang, diba, ang hirap naman intindihin ng English na to, di ba? Pero madali lang yan gawin kasi, basta ang isipin mo, kung i-exercise natin yung warrants or options, di ba meron siyang exercise price. So, ang gagawin mo, i-multiply mo yung total exercise price, itas i-divide mo doon sa kung magkano yung value ng shares sa market para malaman mo kung magkano yung pwede mong ma-repurchase, which is also known as the as if treasury share method natin. Okay? Pero, ito ang mas madaling, ang una mong gawin, bago mo i-compute yan, tignan mo muna kung ano ang mas mataas, exercise price ba or fair market value. Kasi, kaysa magpakapagod ka na mag-compute niyan, i-analyze mo muna kung dilutive ba talaga or hindi. Kasi ganito yan. Kunyari, ang exercise price ay 25 pesos. Tapos, ang market price ay, sabihin natin, 20 pesos. Saan ka bibili? Sa market? Or i-exercise mo yung options mo? Siyempre, hindi mo na i-exercise yung 25. Kasi mas mahal dun eh. Bili ka na lang sa market kasi 20 lang, di ba? So, ang labas, hindi mo i-exercise yung options. Therefore, the options or the warrants is considered to be anti-dilutive. Okay? So, hindi mo na siya gagamitin sa computation. Okay? Kung sakali naman na mas mababa yung exercise price kaysa doon sa market price, then that's the time na gagawin mo tong computation na to. Okay? Kasi, sayang lang yung pagsosolve mo later on kung eventually ang mangyayari pala anti-dilutive pala siya. So sayang lang. Ganun din, kung gusto mo namang straightforward na i-compute to, ganito lang yun. Kapag ang lumabas na sagot mo dito after mong gawin yung computation ay negative na amount, then anti-dilutive yung options or warrants. Kapag naman positive, then hindi siya anti-dilutive. It is a potentially dilutive item. So, yung makukuha mong positive na difference, isasama mo sa denominator later on for diluted earnings per share. Okay, anyway, meron tayong example mamaya sa baba. Next, contingently issuable shares. Okay, so ito na yung mga kapag na-satisfy lang yung requirements, saka lang natin siya i-issue. Okay, so contingently issuable ordinary shares are treated as outstanding and included in the calculation of both basic and diluted earnings per share if the conditions have been met. If the conditions have not been met, the number of contingently issuable shares included in the diluted EPS calculation is based on the number of shares that would be issuable if at the end of the period were the end of the contingency period. Okay, so in other words, kapag itong contingently issuable shares na to, kapag na-meet, edi parehas na nasa basic at saka diluted earnings per share. Pero kapag hindi pa na-meet, yung sa diluted lang siya makaka-apekto. Sa basic, wala muna. Okay? So, ganun lang yan. Restatement is not permitted if the conditions are not met when the contingency period expires. Okay? Next, contract that may be settled in ordinary shares or cash. So, presume that the contract will be settled in ordinary shares and include the resulting potential ordinary shares in the computation for the diluted earnings per share if the effect is dilutive. Okay? We go now to retrospective adjustment. Okay. So retrospective adjustment pertains to what if there are certain transactions na nangyari this period that will warrant the restatement or the recomputation of previous year earnings per share. Okay? So, to simplify, parang ganito. Although ang mga usual dyan yung capitalization, bonus issue, also known as stock dividends, share split, and reverse share split. So parang ganito lang siya. Kunyari, nakapag-compute ka na ng earnings per share for year 2020, sabihin natin. So year 2020, meron ka lang na-compute na earnings per share. Year 2021, nagkaroon ka either ng recapitalization, bonus issue, share split, okay, or reverse share split. So anong mangyari doon? Of course, magbabago yung component or yung number of ordinary shares na meron for 2021. And since the recapitalization, bonus issue, share split, and reverse share split are treated retrospectively, ibig sabihin, kailangan as if nung 2020 or the earliest period presented, dapat i-restate mo rin yung earnings per share mo. Kasi mag-iiba na yung denominator mo for that period. Okay? So parang example, if let's say, ang ginagawa mong financial statement ay 5 years comparative period. 5 years kunyari. Di ba kasi ang minimum lang 2 years. Pero kunyari 5 years. So nakapag-present ka ng comparative FS ng 2020, kunyari 2021 na. So 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017. So hanggang 2017 kunyari. So ibig sabihin, dahil nagkaroon ka ng either recapitalization, bonus issue, share split, or reverse share split ng 2021, lahat ng mga previous years na comparative report na ginawa mo, dapat i-restate mo rin yung earnings per share. Okay? Kasi these are treated as retrospective adjustments. Okay? Parang hindi mo naman kasi pwedeng sabihin na, sir, hindi kasi 2021 lang ako nag-adjust, so dapat hindi mapapalitan yung previous year. Hindi. Kasi kung nagpalit ka ng 2020, 'di ba, ang equity component is a real account, 'di ba? Real accounts ang mga equity component na 'yan. So ibig sabihin, kung nagbago 'yan, pati yung mga previous years dapat napalitan din. Okay? Kasi hindi naman 'yan nagko-close eh. Okay? So therefore, adjust mo rin yung mga 'yon, 'di ba? So ganun yung items natin diyan. Okay? So sabi doon, the EPS calculation for those and any prior period financial statements presented are based on the new number of shares based doon sa nangyaring recapitalization, share split, etc. Disclosure is also required. Okay? Basic and diluted earnings per share also adjusted for the effects of errors and adjustments resulting from changes in accounting policies accounted for retrospectively. Okay? So parang yan yung mga prior period errors natin as provided in PAS 8. Okay? And then diluted earnings per share for prior periods should not be adjusted for changes in the assumptions used or for the conversion of potential ordinary shares into ordinary shares outstanding. Okay? So diluted EPS for prior periods should not be adjusted for changes in the assumptions used. So parang ang labas, kunyari, yung assumptions for the computation ng diluted earnings per share for 2020, biglang nagbago siya noong 2021. Ang ibig lang sabihin yan, yung 2021 diluted earnings per share, yun lang ang palitan mo. Yung 2020 kasi, yun yung condition during that period eh. So tama yung pagkakakompute mo ng diluted earnings per share during that period. Nagkataon lang na yung provisions or yung assumptions ay nagbago. So as of 2021, ito na yung computation. Pero nung 2020, yun pa rin yung iba pa yung condition. So sinundan lang natin yun. So tama yun, di ba? So ganun lang ibig sabihin natin. Okay, finally we go to the disclosure requirements. Okay? So disclosure requirements, if earnings per share is presented, the following disclosures are required. Una, the amounts used as the numerator. Okay? In other words, paano mo na-compute yung net income attributable to ordinary shares. Next, the weighted average number of ordinary shares used as the denominator in calculating basic earnings per share and diluted earnings per share. In other words, paano mo na-compute yung denominator. Okay? Pangatlo, instruments that are potentially dilutive. Okay, so, di ba kasi nagko-compute ka ng basic at saka diluted earnings per share. So, kung sinama mo sa denominator itong mga items na to as potentially dilutive, then you need to disclose also paano sila naging dilutive or paano sila naging anti-dilutive. Okay? So, parang ganun. So, parang pag dilutive siya, i-explain mo bakit siya dilutive. Tapos kung anti-dilutive siya, explain mo rin kung bakit siya naging anti-dilutive. Okay? Next, description of those ordinary share transactions or potential ordinary share transactions that occur after the balance sheet and that would have changed significantly the number of ordinary shares or potential ordinary shares outstanding at the end of the period if those transactions had occurred before the end of the reporting period. Okay, examples include issues and redemption of ordinary shares issued for cash, warrants, and options conversions and other exercises. Parang ang labas, hindi siya naisama sa computation kasi hindi naman siya umabot dun sa cut-off natin which is the end of the reporting period. Pero should it happen na umabot siya, ito yung effect niya. Parang ganun. So, i-disclose mo yan. Okay? An entity is permitted to disclose amounts, okay, per share other than profits or loss from continuing operations, discontinued operations, and net profit or loss earnings per share. Guidance and calculating and presenting such amounts is included in IAS 33, paragraph 37 and 30, paragraph 73 and 73A. Okay, so pwede ka pang mag-compute kasi ng other items, okay, if you want. Pero generally, pag na-satisfy mo na yung requirement na earnings per share, yun din lang. Parang in the other reports that I also see, companies are only providing basic and diluted earnings per share din lang naman. Okay? So that's basically the concept that we need to understand sa computation ng earnings per share. Okay, we go to the theories. Kunti lang naman to. Okay, so let us answer items 1 to hanggang ilan to. Hindi ko malala kung ilan. Anyway, sagutin lang natin. Question number 1, IAS 33 is required, okay, to be used by, sino lang ang required? Yung mga publicly listed or yung mga entities na gustong maging publicly listed. Okay, so let number 3 ang sagot dyan. Number 2, when an undertaking presents both consolidated and separate financial statements, the disclosures required by IAS 33 need be presented, letter or number 2, only for the consolidated information. Okay? Number 3, ano ang ibig sabihin ng anti-dilution? Pag anti-dilution, bababa ang loss per share. Okay? Bababa ang anti-dilution. Tataas ang earnings per share, bababa ang loss per share. Okay? So the answer there is number 1, an increase in earnings per share when convertible instruments are converted to ordinary shares. Okay? Next, number 4, dilution naman, bababa ang earnings per share or tataas ang loss per share. So, dilution is number 2. A decrease in earnings per share when convertible instruments are converted to ordinary shares. Number 5, put options on ordinary shares are contracts to give the holder the right to put. Okay? Kapag call, buy. Kapag put, sell. Okay? So, ang put option is the right to sell ordinary shares. Okay. 6, your preference dividend of 200 million is due. You have reserves of only 40 million. You can pay a preference dividend of, so naisingit lang to, just to check kung maalala mo pa yung concept ng dividends. Okay, so ang sagot ngayon dyan ay 40 lang. Okay, ito yung due, pero ang retained earnings mo lang 40. Hindi ka naman pwedeng mag-declare ng dividend beyond your retained earnings balance. So the answer is 40 million only. 7, examples of potential ordinary shares are financial liabilities that are convertible. So kasama yon. Options and warrants, kasama yon. Shares that would be issued upon the satisfaction of conditions. Treasury shares. Okay, hindi kasama yan. So 1 to 3 lang. Okay, so number 7 is number 4. Number 8, Basic earnings per share amounts uses the profit attributable to yung ordinary shares lang. Okay, so that is net income attributable to ordinary shares or ordinary equity holders of the parent undertaking. Okay? Number 9, basic earnings per share shall be calculated by dividing the numerator by the number of ordinary shares outstanding, which is the denominator, based on the weighted average. Okay? So number 2 ang sagot natin dyan. Next, the after-tax amount of dividends that is deducted from profit or loss is, sabi doon, the after-tax amount of any dividend or non-cumulative preference shares declared in respect of the period, the after-tax amount of the dividends for cumulative preference shares required for the period whether or not the dividends have been declared. Tama din yun, di ba? Sabi natin, kapag non-cumulative, declared lang dapat. Kapag cumulative, whether declared or not. Okay? Any original issue discount or premium on increasing rate preference shares amortized to retained earnings. Any amount of dividends for cumulative preference shares paid or declared during the current period in respect of previous periods. Hindi na kasama kasi previous period na yan. Okay, the amount of any dividends for ordinary shares paid or declared during the current period. Walang kinalaman kasi ordinary yun. Ang binabawas lang natin sa net income is yung sa preference lang. Okay, so ang sagot ay 1, 2, and 3. Hindi kasama yung 4 kasi ang nangyari, payment is this period, pero the period covered is previous period pa. So kumbaga parang na-delay lang yung bayad. So it is not going to be deducted. Kasi cumulative preference share, na ibawas na natin yan nung last period. Okay, na-late lang yung bayad this period, hindi na siya pwedeng ibawas ulit kasi double deduction ang mangyari. So hindi kasama yung 4, hindi rin kasama yung 5 kasi ordinary share dividends na yan. So 1, 2, and 3 lang ang sagot. 11, the time weighing factor is the number of blank that the shares are outstanding. So technically speaking, dapat days talaga ginagamit dyan. So ito ang sagot. Pero for convenience purposes, ang ginagamit natin months. Okay, pero the time weighing factor is generally the number of days. Okay? Kasi mas accurate. Number 12, shares issued in exchange for the settlement of a liability are included in the earnings per share calculation from letter or number 3, the settlement date. Okay? Kasi doon lang yung time na nagkaroon ng additional shares. 13, shares that will be issued upon the conversion of a mandatorily convertible instrument are included in the calculation of basic earnings per share from number 1, the date the contract is entered into. Okay, di ba sabi? This is upon the conversion of a mandatorily convertible instrument. So parang ang labas dyan, isasama siya from the time na meron na yung contract. Bakit? Di ba kasi ang concept nun, kung mandatory siya, wala ka namang choice but really to do that, to convert it, di ba? So, it is already included in the computation of basic earnings per share from the time na nag-enter ka ng contract. Kasi ine-expect mo na talaga na they will be entitled to the shares even if sa future pa siya mangyayari. Okay? 14. Contingently issuable shares are treated as outstanding or are included in the calculation of basic earnings per share from the date when all necessary conditions are satisfied. Okay? Number 2. Take note, iba yung mandatorily convertible instrument sa contingently issuable shares. Okay? Kasi ito, hihintayin mo pang masatisfy yung conditions. Okay? So, saka lang siya magiging kasama sa basic earnings per share pag na-meet yung condition. Pero, kapag mandatorily convertible instrument, okay, kasama na sila since the date na nag-enter ka dun sa contract. Okay, 15. In a capitalization issue, the number of shares outstanding before the event is adjusted for the proportionate change in the number of shares outstanding. Number 2, number 1, as if the event had occurred at the start of the earliest period presented, which is also known as retrospective application. Okay, di ba kasama yan? Capitalization, bonus issue, or also known as share dividends. Tapos yung mga share splits natin, those are treated retrospectively. 16. A share consolidation is combined with a special dividend. The weighted average number of shares outstanding for the period in which the combined transaction takes place is adjusted for the reduction in the number of shares. Number 3, at the date the special dividend is recognized. Okay, kung kailan nangyari yung transaction. 17, diluted earnings per share is required when, number 2, there are potential shares outstanding. Okay? Kasi 'di ba kung wala namang potentially dilutive items, yung basic earnings per share saka diluted parehas lang. Edi ang ginagawa ng mga nagpe-present ng FS, ipe-present pa rin nila yung DEPS, yung diluted earnings per share, pero same as basic earnings per share. Pero pwede namang kahit wag na. Kasi self-explanatory naman or understandable na kapag wala kang pinresent na diluted earnings per share, ibig sabihin walang potentially dilutive item. Okay. For the purpose of calculating diluted earnings per share, an undertaking shall adjust profit by the after-tax effect of dividends, any interest recognized, any other income change. Okay, so 1, 2, and 3 yan. Okay, 19, dilutive potential shares shall be deemed to have been converted into shares, number 3, at the start of the period or if later, the date of the issue of the potential shares. So basta pag potentially dilutive, hindi na siya wini-weight, wala nang time weighing factor. Okay, wala nang time weighing factor 'yon. Kapag DEPS ang kino-compute mo. Nagkakaroon lang siya ng time weighing factor kapag nagkaroon siya ng actual exercise. Okay? Or in the case of share dividends, bonus issue, share split, retrospective pa rin. Okay? 20, an undertaking uses blank as the control number to establish whether potential shares are dilutive or anti-dilutive. Okay, the answer is profit from continuing operations. Okay, pag sinabing the undertaking uses profit from continuing operation as the control number, i-explain ko yan later on kasi kapag nagko-compute tayo later on, malalaman mo kung dilutive siya or anti-dilutive kapag kinumpare mo siya doon sa basic earnings per share. Pero mamaya natin i-explain. Okay, basta ito yung sagot, number 1. 21, if you have some high interest bonds which would be anti-dilutive if converted, this will be included in edi anti-dilutive nga, 'di ba? Edi hindi siya kasama sa basic earnings per share kasi hindi naman siya mako-convert, hindi pa siya kino-convert at hindi rin siya pwedeng diluted earnings per share kasi anti-dilutive nga. So number 3 ang sagot. 22, options and warrants are dilutive when they would result in the issue of shares for, number 2, less than the average market price of shares during the period. Ito na yung in-explain ko sa inyo kanina na kapag mas mababa ang exercise price kaysa sa market price, i-exercise mo. So potentially dilutive. 23, staff share options with fixed terms are treated as options in the calculation of diluted earnings per share. They are treated as outstanding on the grant date. Okay? Number 1 yan. 24, contingently issuable shares. If the conditions are not met when the contingency period expires, restatement of the previous period is not permitted. Specifically stated yan dun sa ating standard. So number 3. Okay, when an undertaking has issued a contract that may be settled in shares or cash at the undertaking's option, the undertaking shall presume that the contract will be settled in shares. Sino ang may option? Yung undertaking or yung entity. So kung siya yung may discretion in the computation of your earnings per share, i-assume mo na shares muna siya. Okay, kasi mas may effect siya doon sa computation mo. 26, when an undertaking has issued a contract that may be settled in shares or cash at the holder's option naman, the undertaking shall presume that the contract will be settled in the more dilutive of the two. So kung ano yung mas may effect doon sa earnings per share computation mo. 27, contracts such as purchase put options and purchase call options are included, number 3, neither in the basic or diluted earnings per share. Okay? For what reason? Kasi options yan eh. Okay? Hindi mo malalaman kung dilutive or anti-dilutive yan kasi unang-una sa lahat, hindi mo alam kung ilang shares ba yan. Pangalawa, hindi mo alam kung kailan i-exercise, 'di ba? So ibig sabihin wala kang basis on the determination kung dilutive ba yan or anti-dilutive. Okay? 28, if the effect is dilutive, contracts that require the undertaking to repurchase its own shares such as written put options and forward purchase contracts are reflected in diluted earnings per share lang. Okay? 29, instruments issued by a subsidiary, joint venture, associate that enable the holders to obtain shares in those organizations are included in diluted earnings per share ulit kasi potentially dilutive lang siya. Okay? Hindi pa siya talaga nangyayari. Okay. So, those are the answers for the theory questions. Let's have the first question for earnings per share. Okay, so question number 1. Land Rover Incorporated had 150,000 shares of common stock issued and outstanding at December 31, 2002. Okay. On July 1, an additional 25,000 shares of common stock were issued for cash. Land Rover also had an unexercised stock options to purchase 20,000 shares of common stock at 15 per share outstanding at the beginning and end of the current year. The market price of the common stock was 20 throughout the current year also. What number of shares should be used in computing diluted earnings per share? So, diluted agad yung item. Yung computation natin. Okay. So, first of all, alamin muna natin kung dilutive ba talaga siya or hindi. Ano ang decision guide natin para doon sa dilutive item? Okay, bago natin gawin yan, i-sum up lang natin ha. Diba sinabi natin di-discuss natin yung decision guide. Okay, dito muna tayo. Okay, so una, kapag ang pinag-uusapan natin ay options, warrants, rights, etc. Basta yung pare-parehas ang nature niya. Okay? Ang lagi mo lang tandaan dyan, these items are dilutive if exercise price is less than the market value. Okay? Kasi ang lagi mong isipin ganito, kapag mas mababa ang exercise price, obviously, exercise price mo na siya or bibilhin mo siya at the exercise price. Kasi kung bibili ka sa market, mas mapapamahal, di ba? Or mas malaki yung babayaran mo. Okay? Also, if we're going to follow the concepts provided by the standard, kapag in-apply mo ngayon yung ating treasury share approach, di ba? Kunyari, exercise price, sabi natin 20 pesos. Ang pwede mong bilhin 10,000 shares. So, 20 pesos, i-try lang natin ha. Labas tayo yung calculator. 20 pesos, ang mabibili mo 10,000 shares. So, that's going to be 200,000. Kung ang value niya sa market ay 25 pesos, i-divide natin to ng 25. Ang mabibili mo lang pabalik 8,000, di ba? So makakabili or makaka-issue or tawag dito from the exercise of these particular items, either options, warrants or rights, meron kang mai-issue na 10,000 shares. Kapag gagamitin natin yung treasury share approach, ang mabibili mo lang 8,000. Okay, so ibig sabihin may difference na 2,000. Yung 2,000, yun lang yung potentially dilutive item mo. Kasi positive yung result niya. O gawin nating baliktad. 25 ang exercise price, 20 ang market price. Okay? So 10,000 shares times 25. Kasi i-divide natin siya ng 20. Ang lalabas doon, 250,000 divided by 20. Ang lalabas 12,500. So, 10,000 lang ang inisyo mo, ang mababuyback mo, 12,500. So, ang effect niya, negative 2,500. Which means na, anti-dilutive yung item. Kasi instead na, mas madami kang ma-issue, mas madami ka pang na purchase back. Diba? So, kaya ang labas doon, anti-dilutive na siya. Which is also the reason kung bakit ito na lang ang decision guide mo. Mas madali pa. Hindi ka mahihirapan kung yan ang decision guide mo. Para bago ka pa mag-compute, alam mo na agad kung dilutive siya or hindi. Okay? Yan. Sige. Next, punta tayo sa second item. Okay? Yung second item, para sa mga convertible shares. Convertible bonds or liabilities. Okay. So, ang gagawin mo dito para sa convertible liabilities, kunin mo muna yung after-tax interest, tapos i-divide mo doon sa number of shares issued upon conversion. Okay? So, yan yung gagawin mo. After nyan, sabihin natin, ito ay known as the factor. Okay? So, yung factor natin, for purposes of evaluating if the convertible bonds or other liabilities are dilutive or not, is ito. I-compute mo muna to. Okay? Tapos, ito ang decision guide mo. The item or the items, ano ba yan? Are dilutive if the factor is less than the basic earnings per share. Okay? So, yan ang decision guide mo. After mo i-compute yung factor, i-compare mo siya sa basic earnings per share. Okay? Kasi, pag nakita mo na yung factor ay mas mababa kaysa doon sa basic earnings per share, sigurado ka na itong item na to ay magiging dilutive. Bakit? Kasi ganito siya. Ano ba yung numerator mo sa factor? Di ba ito yung after-tax interest? Ito yung i-add back mo sa numerator. Yung number of shares upon conversion, ito naman yung ilalagay mo sa denominator. Idadagdag mo sa denominator. Kung ang labas niyan ay mas mataas pa yung factor kaysa dun sa basic earnings per share, ibig sabihin kapag in-incorporate mo itong items na to doon sa ating computation ng diluted earnings per share, mas tataas pa yung ating earnings per share. So, magiging anti-dilutive naman na siya. Diba? So, ito yung factor niya. Okay? So, number 3 naman tayo. Okay? Kasi usually ito lang naman yung mga lumalabas kapag convertible preference shares. Okay. So, ang gagawin mo dito, hanapin mo yung dividends. Preference dividends. Okay? Tapos, divide by the number of shares issued upon conversion. So, ganun din. Tingnan mo to. Di ba yung preference dividends, yan yung binabawas natin para makuha yung numerator for basic earnings per share computation. Kapag i-convert mo yung preference share, edi mawawala na to. So, kapag nawala na to, edi mas tataas yung numerator mo. Tapos kapag nilagay mo din to, yung number of shares upon conversion, ilalagay mo din sa denominator later on for computation, then tataas din yung denominator. So, ganun din ang decision guide mo. Kapag yung factor na na-compute mo ay mas mataas kaysa doon sa basic earnings per share, wag mo nang ituloy. Kasi magiging anti-dilutive lang yan. Pero kapag kabaliktaran, mas mababa yung factor kaysa sa basic earnings per share, then the item is going to be anti-dilutive. Is going to be dilutive. Okay? So, yun yung decision guide mo dyan. Okay. Kapag yung preference share ay non-cumulative, automatic, yan ay dilutive na. Bakit? Kasi kung siya ay, ang tawag dito, kung siya ay non-cumulative, tapos walang dividend declaration, edi obviously, walang naibawas, di ba? Doon sa numerator. Okay? Edi, ang mangyayari na lang dyan, yung denominator lang magi-increase. So, obviously, it's going to be dilutive already. Pero basically, basta yan yung decision guide mo para hindi ka mahirapan later for computation purposes. So, yan yung decision guide natin. Okay? Para mas madali kang mag-decide. Kasi, ang ginagawa ng ibang estudyante, trial and error. dagdag ng dagdag, ilalagay, i-incorporate lahat sa computation, tas whatever will be computed, yun na yun. Not considering whether the item is really dilutive or not. So, syempre, lalabas yan sa choices kasi malamang yung examiner kinonsider na baka ganyan yung ilalagay mong or gagawin mong solution. So, para hindi ka magkamali at para mas mabilis ang iyong computation, ganun ang gawin mo. Sundan mo tong decision guide na to. Okay. So anyway, we proceed. Balik tayo dun sa ating problem portion. Okay. So ito, ang exercise price 20. Ang exercise price 15. Ang market value 20. So automatic, this is dilutive. So anong gagawin natin? Gagawin natin yung gagawin natin yung Treasury share method. So sinabi, 20,000 shares for 15 pesos, di ba? And the market price is 20. So if you're going to bring out your calculator and we are going to compute for the potentially dilutive portion, then ang gagawin mo, 20,000 shares na i-issue mo at 15 pesos, that's 300,000 divided by 20 pesos na market price, which will be the basis kung magkano yung mababuyback mo, that's 15,000. Okay? So, based on your computation, ito yun. Okay? Yun nandito. Yung incremental number of ordinary shares will be ito. Okay? So, wait lang, ihiwalay ko lang to. Kasi baka sabihin mo parehas dun eh. Iba to. Itong computation na to para dun sa outstanding shares. Okay? So, yung 20,000 times 15 is 300. Pag magbabuyback ka, 15 na lang ang mababuyback mo. So, the incremental is 5,000. This is the dilutive portion or the dilutive component, also known as the bonus component. Okay? So, therefore, ang magiging denominator mo na in this problem will be ito yung computation natin ng weighted average number of ordinary shares. So, itong 150, bakit 12 over 12? Kasi outstanding siya since the beginning of the year, since last year pa nga daw. Tapos yung 25, kaka-issue lang siya nung July 1. Kaya 6 over 12 lang ang gamit niya. Okay? So, for purposes of easier computation, per month ang ginawa natin. 6 months out of 12 months. Okay? Tapos idagdag mo tong potentially dilutive item na 5,000. Then ito ang denominator mo. 150 plus 12,500 plus 5,000. So that's going to be letter D. 167,600. Okay? So yan. Wag mo lang kakalimutan to. Okay? So the reason kung bakit ko in-emphasize yan is because later on, if we are going to adjust the earnings per share, may effect tong mga to. Like tingnan mo to. If this stock option was already existing since 2002, then pag magko-compute tayo ng earnings per share, pag tinatanong sa yung 2002, pagbabalikan mo, magre-recompute ka kasi i-include mo yung 5,000 as part of the recomputation of your earnings per share for 2002. Kasi retrospective din ang treatment ng mga yan. Capitalization yan eh. Kasama yan sa capitalization. Okay? Yan. Yan, number 2 tayo. So, Glendale Enterprise has 200,000 shares of common stock issued and outstanding at December 31. On July 1, Glendale issued a 10% stock dividend and exercised stock options to purchase 40,000 shares of common stock, adjusted for the stock dividend at 20 per share were outstanding at the beginning and end of 2003. The market price of Glendale's common stock was 25. So, ganun ulit. 20 ang exercise price, 25 ang market price, so dilutive yan. Net income for the year was 1,100,000. What should be the diluted earnings per share rounded to the nearest penny or the nearest centavo? Okay. Ano muna ang numerator natin? Ang numerator natin, yung net income. Ito. Meron bang preference dividends na binigay? Wala. So, walang ibabawas. So, automatic yun na yung numerator natin. Yung denominator natin will be as follows. Meron tayong 200,000 which is outstanding since the beginning of the year. There was an issuance of 10% stock dividend. Okay? 10% stock dividend, anong 10% nun? That's ng 200,000, that's 20,000. Since retrospective ang treatment niyan, wala nang over yan. Okay? Or wala nang time weighing yan. Kasi baka ang gawin mo, 20,000 times since July siya, 6/12 ang gawin mo. Hindi 'di ba? Ulitin natin. Capitalization, bonus issue or stock dividends, at saka share splits, these are treated retrospectively. So as if nangyari siya at the beginning of the year or of the earliest period presented. So yung 20,000 automatic, dagdag na yun. Wala nang 6/12 or time weighing factor. Tapos ano tong computation na to? Yun yung computation natin for the potentially dilutive item based on the stock option to purchase 40,000 shares at 20 pesos. So saan ulit na-compute itong 32? Yung treasury share method, di ba? Kung ikaw ay mag-i-issue ng 40,000 shares, pag binili siya at 20 pesos, so 800,000 yon, di-divide natin ng 25 pesos na market price, ang mababuyback mo, 32,000. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, 8,000 ang potential dilutive number of shares natin doon. Okay? Kaya ang lumabas, 200 plus 20 plus 8. Kaya 228 yung denominator. So, pag kinompute mo yung diluted earnings per share, ito yung lalabas. Okay? So, bakit hindi na ako nag-compute ng basic earnings per share? Kasi sigurado ako na mas mababa talaga ang basic earnings per share kasi sigurado ako na dilutive item yung yung stock option. Okay? So, ang sagot dito, letter B. Okay, number 3. On January 2, Worley Company issued at par 50,000 pesos of 4% funds convertible in total into 5,000 shares of Worley's common stock. No bonds were converted during the year. Throughout the year, Worley had 5,000 shares of common stock outstanding. Okay? Net income is 5,000. Worley's income tax rate is 40%. No potentially dilutive securities other than the convertible bonds were outstanding during the year. Magkano ang diluted earnings per share? Okay. Okay, so just to prove a point, computin pa rin natin yung basic earnings per share. Ano ang basic earnings per share natin? Yung net income na 5,000. Wala namang binigay na preference shares, so wala tayong ibabawas na preference dividend. So 5,000 na yon. Ilan yung number of shares outstanding? 5,000 din. So, 5,000 divided by 5,000 piso. So, piso ang ating basic earnings per share. Computin natin yung factor ng ating convertible bonds. Okay? Kapag tayo ay nag-convert ng convertible bonds, di ba sinabi doon, 50,000, 4%. So, ito yung interest na binabayad natin. So, 50,000 pesos times 0.04, that's 2,000. Okay? Pero after tax, 'di ba? Sabi natin dun sa guide natin, after tax na interest. So 40% ang tax, so ang may iwan 60%. So 0.6 'yon, 1,2. Kaya 1,2 yung numerator ko sa factor. After tax kasi 'yon. So numerator ko dun sa factor is 1,200,000 divided by the number of shares na may issue upon conversion, that's 5,000 shares. Okay? Ang lalabas, 0.24. So, di ba? Decision guide, dapat kung gusto mong maging dilutive yung item, yung factor dapat mas mababa kaysa doon sa basic earnings per share. Okay? Which is, ito, 0.24 is obviously less than 1, di ba? Kaya ang mangyayari, isasama natin siya sa computation ng diluted earnings per share. So, sa computation ng diluted earnings per share, anong gagawin mo? Yung net income, i-add back mo yung interest na after tax. Tapos, i-divide mo doon sa number of shares na makukuha mo. Okay? Saan nakuha yung 10,000? Yan yung 5,000 na outstanding plus yung 5,000 na outstanding plus yung 5,000 pa na potential na may issue kapag nag-convert ka. Okay, so yun yung items natin doon. Kaya 10,000 yon. Ang lalabas na answer natin ay 0.62. Okay. Number 4. For number 4, Day Planner Incorporated had 250,000 shares of common stock outstanding. On October 1, an additional 60,000 shares of common stock were issued. So this was issued only October. So may time weighing factor yan. 60,000 times October, November, December. So 3 months. 3 over 12. Plus, ano pa yung nangyari? Day Planner also had 2 million of 8% convertible bonds outstanding at December 31, which are convertible into 50,000 shares of common stock. The bonds are dilutive in the earnings per share computation. So, sinabi na nung problem na dilutive. So, magtiwala ka na lang. Hindi naman to auditing problems eh. Kung auditing ang topic mo, or kung auditing ang subject, huwag kang maniwala na dilutive. I-ano mo yan, i-compute mo pa rin. Pero since financial accounting and reporting yung subject, maniwala ka na lang pag sinabing dilutive. So, pag sinabing dilutive, sundan mo lang. So, ibig sabihin, the bonds ito, di ba? The bonds that are convertible into 50,000 shares, automatic idagdag mo na yan sa computation natin. Okay? So, no bonds were issued or converted into common stock during the current year. Ang tinatanong, what will be the amount of the denominator? So, 250 plus yung 60,000 times 3 over 12 plus yung 50,000. So, ang sagot, letter D. Okay? So, yun yung sagot natin. Number 5. The corporation had 200,000 shares of common stock and 10,000 shares of cumulative 6% preferred stock outstanding during the year. Pagkatapos, for 2003, the company had 60,000 net loss from operations and declared no dividends. Tinatanong, magkano ang diluted loss per share if rounded to the nearest centavo? Okay. Ano yung convertible item natin? Yung ano lang yan, no? Yung ito. Yung preferred stock. Okay? After na, ang gagawin lang natin dyan, okay, first compute natin yung basic earnings per share. So, ang gagawin mo doon, di ba meron kang loss na 60. Tapos, pag kinompute natin yung dividends ng preference share, kasi cumulative, so whether declared or not, kailangan pa rin nating mag-issue ng, or kailangan pa rin nating bawas ng dividend. So, 10,000 yon, 6 pesos. Okay? Yun na yung dividend mo, 6 pesos. Automatic. So, 10,000 times 6 pesos, 60,000 yun. So, therefore, ang numerator mo, negative 120,000 divided by 200,000. Okay? So, that's going to be negative 60 centavos. Okay. Kung gusto mo, pwede pa naman tayo mag-compute ng factor para lang sure. So, yung factor natin dito, that's going to be 60,000. 60,000 divided by, this is going to be, ilang shares ulit to? 30,000 shares. 30,000 shares. So, ang lalabas dito ay 2 pesos. Okay. So, ano ngayon? 2 pesos is obviously going to be higher. Okay. 2 pesos is higher than negative 0.60 na BEPS. Therefore, anti-dilutive to. Yun. Kung hindi ka na maniwala doon sa analysis natin, then pwede mong gawin to. O analyze mo. Di ba kapag kinonvert mo yon, ito na lang ang numerator mo. Kasi wala ka nang ibabawas na preference shares. Ang denominator mo will be yung 200,000 plus yung 30,000 na shares upon conversion. So, ang lalabas 0.26. Dati 0.6, naging 0.26 na lang. So, anong nangyari? 'Di ba? Para maging dilutive, dapat either bababa ang earnings per share, para maging dilutive, bababa ang earnings per share or tataas ang loss per share. Yung loss per share mo from 0.6 naging 0.26. So, anti-dilutive na siya. Okay? Kaya, kung anti-dilutive siya, ang magiging diluted earnings per share mo will be the same as the basic earnings per share. So, kaya letter D ang sagot natin sa problem number 5. Okay? So, yun. Okay, we go to the comprehensive problem. Okay. So, the company is a newly incorporated business and has this, meron siyang ganitong transactions. Okay, so there was an issuance of shares on January. Okay, and there was an additional issuance of ordinary shares on April. And there was a 2-for-1 stock split. Okay, nung year-end. Pinapatanong sa atin magkano ang basic earnings per share and there are other assumptions sa baba. Okay, so proceed muna tayo doon sa computation natin sa number 6, yung basic earnings per share. Okay, so paano may kukompute ang basic earnings per share? Una, hanapin natin yung net income attributable to ordinary shares. So, paano yon? O, diba sabi, the company had net income of 2 million at year-end. So, meron na tayong starting point na 2 million doon. Okay. So, yung 2 million na yan, ang gagawin natin dyan, we need to check if there is a preference share. Meron doon, no? Preference share. Sabi, issued 100,000 ordinary shares and 20,000 shares of 10% cumulative preference shares with par value of 50. Cumulative. So, ibig sabihin, kailangan natin computein yung kanyang dividend regardless if it is declared or not. So, that's going to be 20,000 shares times the par value na 50. That's 1 million times 10%. So, that's 100,000. Kaya yung numerator ko sa computation is ito. Yung 2 million na net income, ibabawas ko yung preference dividend na 100,000 whether declared or not. Tapos, i-divide natin sa denominator. Ano yung denominator? Di ba nag-issue ka ng 100,000 shares? Okay, so compute lang natin dito. So, that's 100,000 shares. Yung sa simula muna. Okay. 100,000 shares na issue siya nung January. So, ano ang ratio natin dyan? 12/12. 12/12. So, that's going to be 100,000. Okay. Pagkatapos, nag-issue tayo ng additional na 30,000 ordinary shares. So, that's 30,000. Pero, kailan daw na-issue? April. So, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. 9/12. Okay. So, ano yung 9/12 nun? Kapag kinompute natin. So, 30,000 times 9/12. So, that's 22,500. Okay. Pagkatapos, nagkaroon ng stock split. Di ba sabi natin ng stock split, treated yan retrospectively. So, regardless kung kailan siya na-issue or kailan nangyari, as if nangyari siya at the beginning of the year. So, automatic times 2. Times 2 rin to. Okay, so ang lalabas ngayon dito, this is 200,000. Tapos ito, this is going to be 45, sorry. 45,000. Kaya ang total na denominator natin magiging 245. Okay, so yan. Kaya pag nag-compute ka ngayon ng basic earnings per share natin, that's going to be 1,900,000 divided by 245. Lalabas yung letter C. Okay? Ito nang magiging basis mo ngayon para sa comparison ng factor later on. Kung sakaling may mga potentially dilutive item. So, let's go to number 7. Sabi doon, assuming that the ordinary shares have an average market value of 15 and the company gave the shareholders an option to buy 1 share for every 10 shares held at an exercise price of 13 pesos. The diluted earnings per share is, okay, so una, ang tawag dito, i-check mo muna kung dilutive ba yung item. Diba ang decision guide natin? For as long as the exercise price is less than the market price, it is dilutive. Okay? Ang isa pang decision guide dyan, ito, pwedeng ganito gawin mo. Kunin mo yung factor. Ang factor dyan will be exercise price divided by the market price. Kapag less than 1 yung nakuha mo, dilutive siya. Okay? So, ganun din lang naman. Okay? So, anyway, sure na tayo na dilutive yan kasi mabibili mo lang ng 13 or mai-issue mo at a price of 13, pero ang market price na 15. So, malamang dilutive yan. So, isama na natin siya sa computation. So, pero bago natin gawin yon, alamin muna natin kung magkano yung bonus component. Okay? So, paano mo malalaman yung bonus component natin? Okay? So, that's going to be, ang sabi kasi, ito, the company gave the shareholders an option to buy 1 share for every 10 shares held. Okay. So, ilang shares ba lahat yung na-issue mo? 260. Paano mo nalaman na 260? Di ba nag-issue ka ng 100? Tapos nag-issue ka ng 30. So, 130 na yon. Pero times 2. Kaya magiging 260. Okay. Yun yung actual. Take note, huwag kang malilito dito sa 245 kasi yung 245 weighted average number of shares yan. Okay? Kapag actual, ang pinag-uusapan natin, wag mong lagyan ng time weighing factor. Kaya 260 yung number of shares talaga na na-issue mo. Tapos, 1 for every 10. So, 260 divide or multiply natin ng 10%. Or basically, divide mo ng 10. Ganun din. That's going to be 26,000 shares. Okay? So, ang pwedeng ma-issue or pwedeng additional shares na ma-issue mo is 26,000. So, 26,000 multiplied by 13 pesos. Tapos, i-divide mo naman ng 15 kasi yun yung market price. Ang pwede mong ma-buyback is 22,533. So, therefore, ang bonus component or yung number of shares na pwede mong or itadagdag natin for the computation of diluted earnings per share is the difference between the 26 at saka yung 22,533. So, lalabas yung 3,476. So, yan na yun. So, ang gagawin mo ngayon, yung diluted earnings per share mo, ganun pa rin. Numerator is 1,900,000 divided by 245, yung numerator mo dun sa taas kanina, plus yung potentially dilutive item. Okay? So, ang lalabas letter B, 7.65. Okay? So, check mo ulit. Diba, 7.76 yun. Nung nagkaroon ng share option or option to buy, naging 7.65 na lang. So, bumaba, di ba? So, obviously, dilutive yung item. Okay, number 8. Assuming the preference shares are convertible into 80,000 ordinary shares, magkano ang diluted earnings per share? So, bago ka mag-compute, alamin muna natin kung bago ka mag-compute ng diluted earnings per share, alamin muna natin kung dilutive nga yung convertible preference shares. Anong gagawin mo doon? Ang numerator mo, yung preference dividend, which is 100,000. Ang denominator mo is yung number of shares na may issue upon conversion, which is 80,000. Given na yon. So, ang factor mo is 1.25. It is dilutive because the factor is less than the basic earnings per share. Para maniwala ka, pwede mo namang i-compute. So, ang mangyari, ang numerator mo kanina, 1,900,000 kasi binabawas mo yung preference dividends. Kapag kinonvert mo na yung preference dividends, wala ka ng dividend. Kaya babalik sa 2 million yung numerator mo, which is basically the net income already. Pagkatapos, ang magiging denominator mo, yung 245 na original na weighted average number of ordinary shares plus yung 80,000 which is the number of shares ordinary shares upon conversion of the preference shares. So, ang lalabas dyan ay 6.15. Okay, so obviously, dilutive yan kasi 7.76 yung sagot natin na basic, di ba? Ito na yung magiging bago. So, diluted earnings per share, 6.15 naman. Okay. We go to number 9. Okay. Number 9, assuming that the company has yung 1 million bonds paying 8% interest annually that can be converted into 10,000 shares. Okay? The diluted earnings per share, if tax rate is 30%, will amount to. Okay, so anong unang gagawin natin? Compute natin yung factor. Okay. Ang factor natin is after tax interest divided by the number of shares to be issued upon conversion. So saan natin nakuha yung 56? Di ba 1 million yon? Nagbabayad ka ng interest na 8% per year. So that's 80,000. May tax rate na 30%. So 70% yung after tax. So times 0.7. So that's 56. Kaya 56 yung numerator. Divided by 10,000 shares. Okay, this is the number of shares to be issued upon conversion of the bond. Given na. So lalabas na factor mo 5.6. It is still dilutive kasi 7.76 ang basic earnings per share natin. 5.6 lang yung factor. So ibig sabihin, dilutive pa rin yan. So kapag nag-compute tayo, obviously, mas magiging mababa yung earnings per share natin. So, diluted earnings per share will be computed as follows. Okay? So, 2 million minus 100,000 pa rin kasi hindi naman i-convert yung preference share. So, assume na magbabawas pa rin ng 100,000. Plus 56,000. I-add back natin yung interest na hindi na natin babayaran kung mako-convert yung bonds into shares. Tapos divided by 245 plus 10,000. So, lalabas 7.67. Okay? So, ganun na yan. And then finally, number 10, assuming the last 3 items are all existing as potential dilutive items, how much is the diluted earnings per share? Okay. So, basically, alam natin na yung items natin sa 7, 8, and 9, yung options, yung preference shares na convertible, at saka yung bonds na convertible, lahat yan dilutive. Okay? So, kapag ginawa natin yung computation na lahat ay existing, dapat ang mako-compute nating amount ay mas mababa pa doon sa sagot natin sa number 7, number 8, at number 9. And obviously, dapat mas mababa pa siya doon sa basic earnings per share na 7.76. Okay? Kasi ang hinahanap nga natin, di ba, yung dapat siya ay maging dilutive. Okay? So, pag kinompute natin na lahat ay kinonsider natin, supposedly ang makukuha nating sagot ay lower than the answers in number 6, number 7, number 8, and number 9. So, ano yung solution mo? Ganito. Gagawin mo sa number 10 is like this. Okay? Una, ang numerator mo, 2 million plus 56,000 na lang. Kasi, hindi na magbabayad ng dividends, so wala nang minus 100,000. Hindi na mag-i-incur ng interest, so i-add back natin yung 56,000 na after-tax effect ng ating convertible bonds. Denominator will be, parang ang gagawin mo, pag samasamahin mo lang lahat nung sinama nating denominator sa 7, 8, and 9. So, 245 plus ito yung sa rights or yung sa share options. Ito yung sa convertible preference shares. Ito yung sa convertible bonds. Okay? So, ang lalabas is, that's going to be 2,056,000 divided by 338,467. Ang lalabas, 6.07. Okay? Obviously, 6.07 is less than itong sagot na to, less than ito, less than dun. So, ibig sabihin, tama. Lahat ng items dilutive nga. Kasi pag pinagsama-sama mo lahat yan, dapat ang makukuha mong sagot is yung pinakamababang sagot na possible. Okay? So that's why number 10 yan yung sagot natin. Okay, we go to number 11. Okay, anong tinatanong sa number 11? Basic earnings per share lang. Okay, sige. So, ang nangyari sa problem, sa number 11, madaming transaction na nangyari, tapos gusto niyang ipakompute sa'yo yung basic earnings per share. Wala namang problema sa numerator kasi given na 45,716,000 yung ating numerator. Okay, wala namang dividends na binigay kasi walang nakalagay dito na preference share. So ang issue mo na lang yung denominator. So compute natin, this is your practice for weighing or yung time weighing factor natin. So una, noong January 1 nag-issue ka ng shares na 200,000 or outstanding pala yan. Outstanding shares as of the beginning of the year 200,000. So ang gagawin mo, itong 200,000 times 12 over 12. Okay? Kaya yun. Yung times 2, mamaya natin explain. Noong February 1, nagkaroon ka ng bonus issue or share dividends na 20,000. Ano ulit ang treatment dyan? Di ba retrospective? So, 20,000 times 12 over 12 ulit yan. Kasi nga, hindi natin kino-consider kung kailan nangyari yung transaction kasi retrospective ang treatment. Okay? Next, acquired treasury shares na 12,000. Kailan nangyari? Nung May 1. Okay? So, magbabawas tayo ng 12,000 pero nangyari kasi yan ng May 1. So, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, 8 months out of the total 12 months. Kaya ang factor niya times 8 over 12. Next, issued shares in a business combination na 60,000. So, plus 60,000. Yun nga lang, nangyari siya nung June 1. So, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, 7 out of 12 months lang. Okay? Next, issued shares for cash na 30,000 pero August nangyari. So 30,000 times August, September, October, November, December. So 5 over 12. Tapos September, ito yung September na nangyari, issued a 2-for-1 share split. So ibig sabihin, lahat ng transaction na nangyari prior to September 1 will be considered or will be applied retrospectively for the effect of the share split. 2 for 1. Kaya may times 2, lahat ng transaction simula doon sa January 1 hanggang August 1. Kaya may times 2 doon. Okay, kasi retrospective nga ang application. Pagdating ng December, reissued treasury shares na 6,000, hindi ko na times 2 kasi nangyari na yan after nung share split. So malamang itong 6,000 na to, may naka-take effect na dyan yung ating share split. Kaya wala nang times 2 yan. Kaya ito, reissue once, kaya plus ulit to. 6,000 times 1 over 12 lang. Kasi December 1 nangyari. So pag tinotal mo lahat yan, ang lalabas ay 519,500. So pag magko-compute ka, okay, ito yung lalabas na sagot. Letter C. 88 pesos ang ating basic earnings per share. Okay, so yan. Next, number 12. Okay. Ito na yung sinasabi natin na paano kapag nagkaroon ng exercise ng mga potentially dilutive item, may effect ba siya doon sa ating earnings per share in the succeeding year or in the previous years. Okay? So dito, ang nangyari, meron kang share capital outstanding and no other securities. Okay? Are potentially convertible as of that year. Okay? Noong 20x1, the company reported earnings per share of 288 on its 100,000 ordinary share outstanding. So ibig sabihin, kung 288 yan, tapos 100,000 yung ordinary shares mo. So pag minultiply mo yan, malamang 28,800,000 yung income mo. Which is actually yung naka-provide doon. Ayan, no? Okay. However, anong nangyari? Nung 20x2, 3 distributions of additional ordinary shares occurred. First, nung April, bonus issue na 10% or share dividends. Next, nung July, treasury shares sold. Ibig sabihin, reissue once na 10,000. Tapos, September, 2-for-1 stock split. Okay? So, ano ngayon ang mangyari? Okay? Sabi doon, what amounts should the company report as basic earnings per share for 20x2 and 20x1 comparative income statements respectively? Okay. Diba diniscuss na natin? Capitalization, bonus issue or share dividends, and share splits are going to be treated retrospectively. So anong nangyari? Kahit nangyari itong bonus issue na 10% nung April 1 at September 1 nangyari yung share split na 2-for-1, it will be treated or it will be applied to the earliest period presented, which is in this case yung 20x1 na comparative income statement. So ibig sabihin, dapat hindi 288 ang earnings per share natin for 20x1 kasi kailangan nating i-adjust yung 100,000 ordinary shares for the bonus issue and the stock split na 2-for-1. Kaya ang gagawin mo ganito, for 20x1, yung 28,800,000 na income mo, ang divisor na natin dyan, hindi na 100,000. Kasi yung 100,000 will be subjected to 10% bonus issue, kaya may 1.1 doon. At 2-for-1 stock split, kaya may times 2 doon. Okay? So, ang mangyayari, 28,800 divided by 100,000 times 1.1 times 2, ang lalabas ngayon na earnings per share mo is 130.91. Okay? This is 20x1. Okay? Pagdating ng 20x2, what will be your computation? Di ba ang income daw natin 37 million? Okay? So 37 million divided by, ano na lang ang gagawin nating adjustment dyan? Ang adjustment na lang natin will be ito. Okay? So, yung, saan nang galing yung 220,000 na yan? Yan yung 100,000 times 1.1 times 2. Yan yung 220,000 na yun. Okay. Tapos, yung plus 10,000 na yan, ano tong plus 10,000 na to? This is basically the yung July 1 Treasury shares that were sold. Okay, wait lang. Double check ko. Divided by... Okay. Yun, tama. So, yun yung nangyari doon. Okay? Kaya ang labas dyan, bakit 10,000? Di ba kasi ganito? Ulitin natin na kasi baka inisip mo, bakit 10,000 yun? 10,000 yun, tapos July nangyari. Di ba kasi nga, may share split na nangyari, di ba? So, tingnan mo. Yung 10,000 na treasury shares, di ba? July nangyari yun. So, times 6/12. So, 5,000 lang. Kaso may share split na nangyari na 2-for-1 nung September. Madadamay din siya. So, times 2. Kaya 10,000 pa rin yan. Diba? Balik siyang 10,000 kasi may share split na nangyari. Kaya ang magiging denominator mo in this case naman is ito. Ito yung from the previous year that is already adjusted for the share split and the bonus issue. And ito yung effect doon sa treasury share transaction nung July after considering the share split also. Kaya 10,000 din. Ito yung sagot. Ingat-ingat lang kasi ang tinatanong sa problem, 20x2 and 20x1. So, mauuna yung 20x2, hanapin mo muna yung 160.87 bago yung 130.91. Kaya letter D ang sagot sa number 12. Okay? Next. Ito na yung sinasabi naman natin na computation natin, okay, kapag nagkaroon ng capitalization of the previously or of the previous rights that were outstanding before pa pero kaka-exercise lang siya. Okay, on the current year. So ito yung kwento. So the company meron siyang 100,000 ordinary shares outstanding throughout 20x0. Okay? On January 1, 20x1, Entice issued 100,000 rights to acquire one ordinary share at 200 in the ratio of one new share for every 5 rights held. Okay? So kung 100,000 rights yun, divided by 5, that's 20,000 shares na additional na i-issue later kapag na-exercise yung rights. The market price of one ordinary share immediately before exercise on April 1, 20x1 is 440. Okay, so yan yung market price before the exercise. Okay? Entice reported the following profits. Okay? Tinatanong magkano yung basic earnings per share for 20x0, which is before exercise. Tinatanong sa atin yung magkano yung basic earnings per share 20x1, which is this is the date of the exercise. Tapos 15, how much is the basic earnings per share in 20x2, which is the period after the exercise. Okay. Ang issue kasi natin dito, hindi binigay sa atin kung magkano or kung magkano yung value nung yung fair market value nung shares. Okay? Kasi or nung rights, nung rights. Kasi walang binigay, ang binigay lang 100,000, 200,000 ang exercise price, 440 ang price or ang market value before exercise. Okay? So ang kailangan natin gawin, i-compute natin yung theoretical fair market value ng ating rights. Okay? By using the formula. Take note, this is before exercise. So, ibig sabihin, ang formula natin will be the difference between the fair market value and the exercise price divided by the number of rights plus 1. Okay? So, I hope you still remember ano ang difference ng before exercise at saka after exercise. Kasi sa computation ng theoretical fair market value, kapag yung binigay sa'yo na fair value ng shares ay before exercise, ibig sabihin naka-incorporate pa doon sa price yung rights, di ba? Kaya tatanggalin natin yung effect nun, kaya may plus 1. Kapag naman yung binigay na fair market value sa'yo is after the exercise of the rights, then tatanggalin mo yung plus 1 sa denominator. Kaya sa computation natin, ito yung lalabas. Okay? So the theoretical fair market value of the rights is equal to the fair market value less the exercise price divided by the number of rights needed plus 1. Okay? Kaya lalabas 440 minus 200, that's 240, divided by number of rights needed 5 plus 1. Okay? Yung plus 1 na yan, constant number yan. Kapag before exercise. Kapag after exercise, tatanggalin mo yung plus 1 na yan. So anyway, 240 divided by 6, that's going to be 40 pesos. So, ibig sabihin, ang fair market value, ang average fair value nung stock natin is going to be 400. Kasi tatanggalin mo yung 40. Kasi nga yung 40, value yun nung rights. Okay? So, kung 440 including the rights, tatanggalin ko yung 40, 400 na lang ang market value. Bakit importante na makuha mo to? Kasi nga, gagamitin mo siya doon sa pagko-compute mo ng bonus component at saka fair value component ng ating shares. Okay? Yan, no? Diba? So, diba ang sabi doon? Balikan ulit natin. 100,000 rights, kailangan mo ng 5 rights. So, ilan ang may issue mong shares? 20,000. So, 20,000 shares times 200. Kasi ang exercise price 200. So, ang makukuha mong proceeds 4 million. Yung 4 million, divide natin ng 400 per share, which is yung ating average fair market value. So, ang mabibili mo pabalik is 10,000, which is now known as the fair value component. Okay? So, ang bonus component lang natin is 20,000 minus the 10,000 na fair value component. So, 10,000 din yun. Nagkataon lang na parehas. Okay? Pero syempre, ingat-ingat ka kasi hindi mo pwedeng pagbalik na rin ang fair value component at saka ang bonus component. Ang bonus component, yan yung for purposes of computing the diluted earnings per share. Okay? So, yun siya. So, anyway, ang tanong, how much is the basic earnings per share in dito muna sa taas. How much is the basic earnings per share in 20x0? Okay, before exercise. Okay. Again, 'di ba? Nung 20x0, wala pa namang exercise na nangyari. Pero bakit kailangan natin siyang i-adjust? Kasi yung exercise of rights, the exercise of the rights is considered as capitalization. Isa siya doon sa component ng retrospective application together with the stock split at saka bonus issue. So, kailangan i-adjust natin yung computation natin ng earnings per share nung 20x0. Okay, so 20x0, what will be your computation? Diba 20x0 ang income mo 900. So, yun ang numerator mo, 900. Divided by yung 100,000 na ordinary shares that was outstanding throughout plus ano to? Ay, lagyan natin siya ng mali yung pinaglagyan natin ng comma. Plus the bonus component of the rights. Okay, which is 10,000. Okay? Kaya ang sagot natin, 8.18. Okay, retrospective application ng rights. Okay? Now, iba ang usapan pagdating sa 20x1. Kasi sa 20x1, yan nang nagkaroon ng exercise. Okay, di ba sinabi, before exercise on April 1, 20x1. So, ibig sabihin, pagdating ng after 20x1 or after April 1, 20x1, na-issue na. So, ibig sabihin, meron ng bonus component, meron pang fair value component. So, anong gagawin mo for 20x1? Okay, ganito mangyari ngayon dyan. Ang net income natin, 1 million. So, numerator is 1 million. Ang number of shares ngayon na gagamitin mo for purposes of computation will be 100,000, which is yung outstanding nung beginning of the period pa, plus 10,000, which is the bonus component. Diba? Retrospective nga ang application, diba? Kaya meron tayong yung 10,000 dito na, saan na yun? Ito, yung bonus component na 10,000. Okay. Ito po yun, sorry. Yan, nung 10,000. Kasi 10,000 din yung fair value component. Okay, so, automatic nandun na yon. Tapos, yung fair value component will be weighed. Okay, based on the time weighing factor. Saan ko nakuha yung 9/12? Kasi 'di ba sinabi, the exercise happened on April 1, 20x1. So, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So, 9 months yon. Ibig sabihin, the fair value component is only outstanding for 9 months out of the total 12 months during 20x1. Okay? So, ulitin. Yung 100,000 kasi last year pa yan or since 20x0 pa yan outstanding. So, wala nang time weighing factor yan. Yung 10,000, which is the bonus component of your share rights, is automatically at 100% na rin kasi treated retrospectively. Yung fair value component will be weighed kasi it was only exercised April of 20x1. Therefore, the time weighing factor is already 9/12. Kaya ang lalabas, na answer natin for number 14 is letter D, 8.51. Okay? Pagdating ng 20x2, wherein parehas ng outstanding since the beginning of the year, yung bonus component at saka fair value component, ang computation natin ng earnings per share will be 1,200,000, yung kinita ng 20x2, divided by the original amount outstanding since 20x0, plus bonus component, plus fair value component. Yung fair value component, wala nang time weighing factor. Bakit? Kasi last year pa na-exercise. So as of beginning of 20x2, that's already outstanding na 100%. Okay, so ang sagot ay letter A naman, 10 pesos. Okay, so yan yung sagot natin sa number 15. Okay, number 16 is AICPA adopted. Okay, so anong tinatanong dito? At December 31, 20x2 and 20x1, Go Corporation had 100,000 ordinary shares and 10,000 5% 100 par value cumulative preference shares outstanding. No dividends were declared on either the preference or ordinary shares in 20x2 or 20x1. Profit for 20x2 was 1 million. For 20x2, basic earnings per common share amounted to. Okay, so kailangan natin i-compute yan. Okay, so para tayo magko-compute. So, ang sabi doon, ang tinatanong 20x2, di ba? Okay. So, yung ating net income, 1 million. Magkano yung ating preference share dividends? That's going to be 5 pesos, ay 5% ng 1 million. Yung 1 million, saan nakuha yun? Yun yung 10,000 times 100. So that's going to be 50,000. So 1 million minus 50,000, that's going to be 950 divided by, saan nakuha yung 100,000? Ayun, given na yun, no? 100,000 ordinary shares since 20x1 pa. Okay, so divide mo lang yung lalabas letter B. 950. Okay, wala namang issue dyan. Okay. So, yun na yung sagot natin for 16. Sa 17 naman tayo. Ito daw yung capital structure. Ordinary shares 200, non-convertible preference shares 50. On October 1, 20x7, nag-issue ng 10% share dividends on ordinary shares and paid 100,000 cash dividends to the preference shares. Profit for the year ended December 31 was 960. Magkano basic earnings per share? Madali na lang yan. Kunin mo yung kinita na 960. Ibawas mo yung 100,000 na cash dividend. Divide mo yung saan nakuha tong 220. Di ba meron kang outstanding na 200 ordinary shares? Kaso merong 10% share dividends which is going to be treated retrospectively. So that's going to be 220. So lalabas yung 3.91. Yun na yung ating sagot dyan. Wala namang complicated computation dyan. 18. Anong tinatanong sa atin sa number 18? Ang tinatanong ay what number of shares will be used to calculate basic earnings per share? Okay. So, the following transactions happen. So, meron kang ordinary shares na 5 pesos ang par value outstanding since the beginning of the year na 20,000. Nagkaroon ng 2-for-1 stock split noong April pero treated yan retrospectively. So, that's going to be 20,000 times 2 agad. Diretso, times 2. Kaya 20,000 yung effect niya kasi nga na-double, di ba? So, making 40,000 na yon. Nag-issue ka ng shares nung July 1 na 10,000. That's going to be 6/12. So, 5,000 na lang yon. Tapos, preference shares, ano to? 10 pesos par value, 5% cumulative shares outstanding. Okay, so, ito naman ay basis ng computation later ng dividends. Pero wala namang problema, hindi naman siya kasama sa computation kasi ang tinatanong, denominator lang para sa basic earnings per share. So, ang may effect lang itong tatlong unang items. So, lalabas ito, that's 40 plus 5, 45, letter B. Okay. 19, tinatanong ulit yung weighted average number of shares using this information. So, sige. Yung beginning, meron tayong 30,000, so 12/12 na yon. Nagkaroon tayo ng ordinary share dividend na 10%. February nangyari pero retrospective pa rin yan. So ang gagawin natin ay 3,000 times 12/12 pa rin yan. Pagkatapos, issued ordinary shares in a business combination nung March 1 na 9,000. Pero yung 9,000 shares, may time weighing factor siya na ilan yun? March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So 10/12. Tapos, nagkaroon ka ng issuance ulit nung July na 8,000 shares. So that's going to be 8,000 times 6/12. So that's going to be, ang tawag dito? That's going to be 4,000 naman. Okay. So pag kinuha mo yung total, yun na yun, 44,500. So, letter C yung sagot natin dyan sa number 19. Okay. Next, number 20. Okay. Ano tinatanong dito? Run Incorporated had 20,000 ordinary shares outstanding at January 1, 20x3. On May 1, 20x3, it issued 10,500 ordinary shares. Okay. Outstanding all year were 10,000 shares of non-convertible preference shares on which a dividend of 4 pesos per share was paid. Okay? Profit for 20x3 was 96,700. Magkano ang basic earnings per share? So, madali lang ulit yan. Kunin mo yung profit, ibawas mo yung preference dividends. Saan nakuha yung 40,000? Yun yung 10,000 shares times 4 pesos. Kaya 40,000. Tapos, Ano ang denominator natin? Yung 20,000 na outstanding since January. So that's going to be 20,000 na rin. Tapos yung inisyo mo na 10,500 ordinary shares pero nangyari lang siya nung May. So May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, 8 months. Okay? So yun yung denominator mo. Lalabas yung answer natin na 2.10. Okay. 21. Meron tayong two classes of stock. We have 100,000 shares na common and 1,000 shares of preference share. Okay? The net income was 900,000 and its income tax rate was 30%. In the computation of diluted earnings per share, the amount to be used in the numerator is, okay, so ano to? 1,000 shares, 4% preferred stock, convertible into common stock. So kapag mag-compute tayo ng DEPS, tatanggalin na natin yung preferred dividend, di ba? Kaya ang numerator mo na, eksaktong yung eksaktong yung net income na lang. Kaya 900,000 ang sagot mo. Okay, so yun siya. 22. Okay, at December 31, the company had 600,000 ordinary shares outstanding. Noong April 1, 2023, additional 180,000 ordinary shares were issued for cash. Tapos, meron siyang 5 million of 8% convertible bonds outstanding throughout the year, which are convertible into 150,000 ordinary shares. Walang na-convert pero tinatanong siya, pag magko-compute ng diluted earnings per share, magkano yung denominator? So, yung 600, 12 over 12 yun, kasi outstanding siya all throughout the year. Yung 180,000 na na-issue nung April, 9 over 12 lang. Bilangin mo na lang, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Tapos yung 150,000 na upon conversion, that is potentially dilutive. Okay, so that's going to be, pag adin mo lahat, 885 yung lalabas. So that's going to be letter C. Okay. Next, 23. Okay. So, ang pinapakompute sa atin, diluted earnings per share. So, bago natin i-compute, alamin muna natin yung basic earnings per share. Kasi, yun yung magiging determination natin para ma-check kung yung item nga ay dilutive or not. So, basic earnings per share first will be computed as magkano yung net income? 840. Magkano yung dividend? Sabi doon, 20,100 ang par value tapos 6%. So, 20,000 shares times 100 pesos times 6%, that's 120. Kaya 120,000 yung lumabas dito. Divided by 200,000 shares kasi yun lang naman yung shares outstanding all throughout. So, 3.6 yung lalabas doon. Kapag i-convert mo daw yung preference shares, it will be convertible into 5 shares of common stock. So, yung 20 times 5, 100,000 yun. Okay? Kaya yung factor, yung computation natin ng factor dito, that's going to be 120,000, which is the preference dividends, divided by 100,000, which is the number of shares to be issued upon conversion. So, ang lalabas, 1.2. 1.2 ang factor, 3.6 ang basic earnings per share, so dilutive na siya. Okay? So, expect natin na kapag magko-compute tayo ng diluted earnings per share, dapat lower than 2.6. Okay, so dapat lower than 2.6 yun. 3.6 I mean, sorry. So, kinompute natin, diluted earnings per share, 840 na yan, tapos 300 to kasi 200 plus 100, lalabas 2.8, which is correct. Okay, so yun ang sagot natin sa 23. 24, ano ulit ang pinapakompute dito? Diluted earnings per share ulit. Ano ang ating dilutive item? Yung bonds natin. Okay, so computein muna natin yung basic earnings per share. Ang kinita daw natin 1,000 pesos. Ang number of shares natin 1,000 ordinary shares outstanding. So piso. Computein natin yung factor. Kapag tayo ay magbabayad ng, sabi kasi doon, ang ating utang na bonds, hindi yan. Hindi pala bonds, shares pala. issued at par 10,000, 4%. Ay, bonds pa naman. Ang kulit. Bonds convertible into 1,000 ordinary shares. Okay, so anyway, computein natin. Kung may 10,000 na bonds ka, times 4%, that's 400. Pero tax rate is 50%. So times 0.5 din yung after-tax effect niya. So 200. So computein natin yung factor. 200 divided by 1,000 kasi 1,000 shares yung makukuha mo upon conversion or i-issue mo upon conversion. So 0.2 yung factor. Yung factor na 0.2 which is less than the piso na basic earnings per share gives us an idea na dilutive ngayong item. So to prove, pag kinompute natin, diluted earnings per share will now become 1,000 na net income, add back mo yung 200 na after-tax dividend divided by 2,000 shares, which is yung 1,000 plus yung 1,000 doon sa conversion. So 0.6 yung lalabas, letter D. Okay? Next. Doon tayo sa number 25. Tinatanong ulit magkano ang diluted earnings per share. So bago tayo mag-compute ng diluted, start muna tayong mag-compute ng basic earnings per share. So your basic earnings per share is computed as net income muna. Okay, yan yung 35. May binigay pa sa atin na preference shares? Wala. So wala tayong ibabawas sa 35. So the numerator will be 35 already, automatic. Ilan yung number of shares outstanding? 10,000. Walang additional transaction. So 10,000 na yun. So that's going to be 350. Okay? Computein natin yung factor kapag i-convert na natin yung bonds ulit. Okay. So 10,000 times 7% times a tax rate of 30%, ang lalabas na after-tax interest ay 49. Tapos, divide natin ngayon sa ang factor dapat ay anong sabi? Each bond was convertible into 4,000 lang. Bakit 0.35? Mali 4,000 lang dapat to. Okay, so 49 divided by 4,000. So that's going to be 1.225. Mali yung factor, sorry. 1.225. So the factor is 1.225 which is still lower than the basic earnings per share. So dilutive yung item. So mag-compute tayo ngayon ng diluted earnings per share. 35,000 plus yung 49. Okay, kasi add back na natin yung interest na to. Tapos denominator natin will be 10,000 plus yung 4,000 na number of shares issued kapag conversion of the bond, lalabas letter B. Okay, so paulit-ulit lang naman yung process. Okay, 26. Okay, 26 pinapa-compute sa atin yung ulit to. The number of shares to be used in computing diluted earnings per share for the quarter. Okay, sige. So may options ka to purchase 9,000 ordinary shares at 7 pesos each. The market price is 10.50. So yun ay yung March 31. Pero average is 9 pesos. So parehas pa rin. Exercise price is 7. Market price is 9. So dilutive. Okay? So kailangan na lang natin i-compute kung ilan yung additional shares. Okay? So, kung 9,000 shares yung pwede nating mabili at 7 pesos, that's 63,000. Gamitin na ay mabili, ma-issue. Okay? 63,000 divided by 9 for the repurchase at market price, 7,000 yung may iwan or yung pwede nating i-buy back. So, ibig sabihin, the bonus component will be yung 9,000 na may issue natin minus yung 7,000 na pwede nating i-buy back. So, 2,000 lang ang bonus component. Okay? So, the answer here will be yung 50,000 shares na outstanding plus yung 2,000 na bonus component nung ating option. So, lalabas 52,000 letter D. Okay. 27. Okay, so nung tinatanong sa 27, the amount which should be shown as max diluted earnings per share, okay, is, okay, so kailangan nating alamin lang. Ano ba ang meron ulit? Meron kang option to purchase 10,000 shares at 10 pesos per share. These options were granted in 20X5 and none had been exercised. The market prices are as follows. Average price, sa average ka lang tumingin ha. Okay? Doon lang tayo sa average. 25 ang average price. Exercise price 10. Obviously, ano na yan? Dilutive na yan. Kasi mas malaki, mas mababa ang exercise price kaysa sa ating average market price. So, how are you going to compute for the bonus component? Diba? Yung 10,000 shares na pwede mong ma-issue based on the option times 10 pesos, that's 100,000. Yung 100,000, i-divide mo ng 25, ilan ang treasury shares na pwede mong mabili? 4,000. So the bonus component is 10,000 minus 4,000, which is therefore 6,000. So ang gagawin mo, yung profit na 100,000, i-divide natin by the 100,000 common stock plus the 6,000 na bonus component na na-compute natin. Kaya ang sagot, letter C. Ito yung solution natin para makuha natin yung diluted earnings per share. Okay. 28. Okay. So for number 28, meron tayong ordinary shares, convertible preference shares, at saka convertible bonds. During 20X5, nagbayad ng dividends na 3 pesos per share on the preference shares. The preference shares are convertible into 20,000 ordinary shares. The bonds are convertible into 30,000 ordinary shares. Okay? Profit is 850, income tax rate is 30%. Pinapakompute sa atin yung diluted earnings per share. Bago natin gawin yun, syempre, start pa rin tayo sa basic earnings per share. So the computation of the basic earnings per share will be net income minus any preference dividends. Sinabi na nga, nagbayad ka ng 3 pesos doon sa preference. 10,000 shares yon, so 30,000 yon. Divided by ilan yung number of shares outstanding? 100,000 since the beginning of the year. So, 110,000 na rin yun. So, ang lalabas na basic earnings per share is 7.45. Ito yung magiging basis natin ng pagko-compare doon sa factor. Yung factor na na-compute natin sa preference shares, that is 30,000 na dividend divided by 20,000 na ordinary shares upon conversion. So, 1.5. Mas mababa siya sa basic earnings per share. So, dilutive. Yung convertible bonds natin, 56. Saan natin nakuha yung 56? Di ba sinabi, yung, ang tawag dito, yung bonds, 8%. Okay? So, kung 1 million yon, kung 1 million yon yung bonds, multiply mo ng 8%, that's 80,000. Pero ang tax rate ay, anong tax rate daw natin? 30%. So, times 0.7 ang after tax. 56,000. Kaya 56,000 yung after tax interest divided by 30,000 kasi sinabi na convertible into 30,000 shares. Ang factor 1.87 still lower than your basic earnings per share. So, this is still dilutive. Okay? So, anong gagawin mo? I-incorporate mo parehas sa computation ng dilutive earnings per share, yung preference share at saka yung bonds. So, 850, wala nang minus 30 kasi mako-convert na nga, di ba? Tapos plus 56 kasi wala nang interest just in case. Divided by 110 plus 20 plus 30. So, lalabas letter B. 5.66, which is obviously lower than the basic earnings per share. Okay, 29. Ano ulit tinatanong? So, ano naman to? Same items. May ordinary share, may convertible preference shares as may bonds. Okay, binigay din yung conversion. So, parang same dun sa 28, pero kailangan mo pa rin i-test kung dilutive or not. So, start muna tayo sa computation ng basic earnings per share. Using the same process, ang basic earnings per share natin ay 4.72. Computein natin yung factor ng preference share at saka convertible bonds. For the preference share, the factor will be 60,000 preference dividend divided by 10,000 the number of shares of ordinary shares to be issued upon conversion, giving us a factor of 6. The factor is already higher than the basic earnings per share, which means that this is anti-dilutive. The factor of the convertible bonds is 45,000 divided by 30 using the same process as a while ago. 45,000 being the after-tax interest, 30,000 being the number of ordinary shares issued upon conversion, giving us a factor of 1.5. So this is dilutive. So therefore, in the computation of your diluted earnings per share, hindi mo isasama si preference share. Ang kasama lang ay si bonds. So, pag magka-compute ka na ng diluted earnings per share, ang gagawin mo, for 185,000 na net income, ibawas mo pa rin yung 60,000 na preference dividends, pero i-add back mo na yung 45,000. Divided by 90,000 na outstanding ordinary shares plus yung 30,000 for the conversion of the bonds. Yung bonds lang kasi nga anti-dilutive yung preference share. So, lalabas letter B. Okay? Yan. Okay? Number 30. Last item. Okay. So, J Company had 10,000 ordinary shares outstanding. There was no potential dilution of earnings per share except as follows. Okay. In 20x7, J Company agreed to issue 2,000 additional shares of its stock to the former stockholders of an acquired company if the acquired company's earnings for any of the 5 years since 20x8 hanggang 20x12 exceed 5,000. So results of the operations for 20x8 were as follows. Profit of J Company is 10,000. Profit of acquired company is 4,000. Consolidated profit is 14,000. Diluted earnings per share for 20x8 on a consolidated basis would be, the answer is letter A. That's going to be 14,000 divided by 10,000 only. We are not going to consider any amount for dilution because hindi naman na-meet yung condition. Ayun, the denominator will remain to be 10,000 since the condition is not yet met. Thus, the contingent shares are not yet considered as a potential dilution. Kasi hindi pa naman talaga siya ma-i-issue kasi wala namang condition na na-meet. Okay? So, yun yung sagot. Kung sakali sanang na-meet, for DEPS purposes, 12,000 na ang denominator. Okay, so anyway, in this case, the answer is letter A. Okay?